Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. For our regular listeners, welcome back. For those of you that are new, welcome to Baskets of Knowledge. Tony, nice to see you back. How have you been since we last spoke to you, and what have you put into your basket of knowledge?
Yeah, I've been going through some stuff that I've been dealing with, but I think something that I've really learned over the last couple of weeks in particular is just to really focus on those support structures, especially family. I think sometimes we often forget just how much our family cares about us, especially when you've moved out of home, for example. For me, moving away after not to do study, it's been quite insightful, I think, the last couple of weeks to get that wraparound support and yeah, just have I guess, a breath from everything else that I've been trying to do and achieve. So it's been really nice to, yeah, have family there to support me through thick and thin.
Which is really good and something we forget about that our family are always there. There's a quote that you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family, right? So we've got to remember that there. Thank you, and it's great to see you back again. My ponder over the last week or so was this is going to sound really nerdy, but I'm just going to say it anyway. It is the impact of dopamine. Dopamine, what a random topic. The reason why I say the impact of dopamine is I was in a workshop on Monday morning, and the facilitator spoke about the dopamine spikes, and I was like, oh, let me go into this crazy rabbit hole of what dopamine is all about. And it was really interesting learning about the impact of dopamine when you first get up in the morning, and how if you regulate that in the morning, it affects your whole day. And why I talk about regulating is because a lot of us jump on our phones and social media and things like that there. And what happens is chemically your dopamine spikes, which then means it doesn't regulate it through the rest of the day, which is why you feel tired. And I was like, this is interesting. Did that stop me from going on the phone in the morning? It probably didn't, but I'm just sharing that out there. So if you're out there and you're wondering why you shouldn't go on your phones, don't be like me. This is the reason why you shouldn't. Apparently. That's my little nerdy intro and thought process. Nothing deep, nothing meaningful, just a crazy, crazy insight into a chemical called dopamine. But hey, for those of you that have been jumping on for a while, Tana and myself can keep bantering forever and ever now, but it's not about us. Today we are really lucky, really privileged to have a guest that is someone that has inspired us. They might not know this, although they do sort of inspired us by the work that they do. A few months ago, I caught up with them about their podcast and the learnings that they've had, but also I've been following them in the background for a while and seeing how they have taken on something that's really a passion project, and has taken it and changed the world one person at a time. It's someone that we both think is a fantastic mentor for us. They don't know this here, but they've been a mentor for us quietly in the background as we watch them operate, but also someone that has always, whenever they put stuff online, it's always so real, so authentic, and just, good stuff. And we're really honored and privileged to have this person on our podcast today. Welcome to Boss of Knowledge, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much, Prajesh, Tane. Really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, it's so great to be a part of to be a part of your ongoing series of really cool conversations. So I also feel privileged to be here.
No, beautiful. Thank you. Sarah, for people who don't know who you are, who is Sarah today on the 1st of May, 2025?
Oh, man. Sarah is a new Londoner. So I've moved over from Aotearoa. So I originally am from Auckland, West Auckland, and I lived there all my life, never moved out for uni or for any other reason. Apart from actually the last 6 months of living there, I was living in the Mount in Tauranga, so loved it there, but then decided it was time for me to travel again. And I went for a year-long travel stint where I lived as like the very typical digital nomad life. I was working, moving around, didn't have a place to call home. And then it got to a point where not having a place to call home became very unsettling. So I had to choose somewhere to put some roots down, and that eventually became London. So today, on the 1st of May, Sarah is someone who's really nervous but excited for the future, someone who's currently looking for a job, and yeah, someone who's just really curious about what opportunities lie ahead.
Amazing, amazing. I love that because there's so much in it. There's the fact that you were living at home or within a similar place for a long time and then shifted totally, and now you're in a place of curiosity and excitement and also nervousness, which are all amazing and sometimes scary feelings to have. But if we reverse back and talk to Sarah in, say, 2019, when Sarah was finishing up at AUT, and was
Yeah.
about to start of her life journey. And we would say to Sarah 2019, hey Sarah, in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, you're going to be running a podcast that's going to be smashing numbers all over the place. What would you have said to us at that point in time?
Oh, wow. I probably would have said a podcast. That's interesting. I wonder why I would have chosen that. And 2019 is like a very pivotal time for me because I was finishing university and I had come sort of, I'd received a scholarship in high school, which pretty much guaranteed you an internship. And at that point, I knew not only did I have an internship, but I also had a graduate role at a corporate accounting firm. And I had never thought to myself once why I would actually want to do accounting or why I wanted to do a business degree, really. It was just first in my immediate family to go to university. I was reasonably academic. So, those things kind of line up to be like, you should be going to university and you should be studying. So that's what I did. So when it came to the end of my degree, I was in a very confusing place of, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is my purpose? And that's when I actually came up with the idea of the podcast and started working on it. And so for me, I think I would be really excited to hear how that went and I'd have no idea just the impact having the podcast would have on my life. And I'm the biggest advocate of having a podcast. I mean, I'm sure you both are well aware of the people you get to meet, the things you learn, the connections you make. It adds so much richness to your life. And I think conversation adds so much richness to people's lives and just access to information. So, yeah, I would be really excited at the thought of what potential the podcast might have.
Oh, I love that. And I love to think about what made you choose a podcast, at that point in time. Like you said, 2019 is pivotal. It's before COVID. It's actually even before the world of podcasts started exploding. Now, it's going crazy right now. But in 2019, if you said podcast, people were like, what is that? Why would you do that? Are you Tim
Yeah.
Ferriss? Are you Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan?
Yeah. I know. And I didn't even really listen to podcasts myself, to be honest. Like I had a few, but they weren't a massive part of my life at that point. And you're right, like pre-COVID, there wasn't a lot of people starting podcasts. It wasn't a popular format to be on. And there also wasn't a lot of relatable chat around financial literacy, which was the genesis of why I started the One Up project. So it was kind of an interesting, like when I think back, it's very interesting that my mind came to wanting to do a podcast and making it about financial literacy because there wasn't really a natural path there, but it came very much organically from my own struggles. Like I did an accounting degree, and I think sometimes people have this assumption that when you study accounting or finance, you're suddenly really good with money, but that's not the truth at all because you're not learning like budgeting and you're not learning like how to actually manage a household or whatever. You're just managing how to do financial statements and like the rules of accounting, which a lot of them are outdated anyway. So it doesn't really like actually help you become more financially literate in as many ways as you would expect. And so I had a conversation with one of my fellow interns at my job. And he was asking me if I had adjusted my KiwiSaver rate, like what fund I was with, the provider I was with, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I found it so confusing. And then he started talking about how his dad was an early investor in Xero, and like he'd managed to do all of this with his investments and his money. And I just remember it confusing me so much, but also being so interesting, right? Because I think, oh, wow, like you can make your money work for you. That was kind of the start of me thinking, oh, so there's more to life than just earning a paycheck and saving a paycheck. And I think I grew up with very traditional values where it was like saving is good. And that's kind of where the financial advice ended. So for me, I just got a little bit more curious about learning of those things. And my original intention was to reach out to people and have these conversations regardless, because I love catching up with people, for a coffee, just having a chat, learning from them, absorbing everything they know. But I thought to myself, if I'm going to do that anyway, why not record them and make it public so that everyone can hear? Because I've also typically been the kind of person who is okay with looking a little bit foolish or embarrassing myself. So I didn't mind being a beginner and being the first person to learn, but I know not everyone's like that. Some people don't want to put themselves out there first. Some people can't be vulnerable and saying that they don't know certain things. So I wanted the podcast to be a safe space where you could listen, no pressure to actually take anything from it. You could be cleaning, you could be running, you could be driving, like whatever you wanted. And I wanted to create a really casual and safe space for people to absorb and learn information that they weren't already aware of, especially about complex topics like personal finance, which is so commonly misunderstood, so many parts of it. So the podcast in itself was like a great opportunity to make the information accessible, which was always the goal, to be accessible as possible. And yeah, it offered a way for me to dive deep into other people's knowledge in a way that was natural for me already through conversation. So yeah, it was kind of just a combination of things, and like the snowball of curiosity that ended up coming out in the One Up project.
I love that. I love the word curiosity. It's come up quite a few times, and it's very similar to what Tana and myself was started with. Because what I loved there was you said doesn't matter about being perfect. You wanted to share, just get out there and do some stuff there and record it. And I think a lot of people out there try to be perfect, try to justify why they're doing things. But it sounds like you're like, hey, I like talking. Let's record this talk, and if people want to listen, they'll listen. If they don't listen, they don't listen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the best creative projects start as well, whether or not it's art or a podcast or whatever it is. It just starts from a place of not being too concerned with the outcome, but being completely obsessed with the process. And that was
Yeah.
what was so organic and amazing about the podcast in its infancy, or when it started, was that I had no real intentions for what it was to become. I just loved doing it. And yeah, I think that's a really, really special place to be when you're creating anything.
Yeah, and it's awesome being a creator, right? And you don't, and again, I love how you said creativity can be anything. It doesn't have to be the traditional word of creativity. It can be exactly creating a podcast. It could be writing a book. It could be whatever creativity looks like. And you get those muscles
Mm.
engaged. I had a bit of a chuckle because I also grew up in a world where financial literacy means can you save money? That was it. And I still remember growing up, my dad would be like, "Oh, cool, have you got a savings account? Okay, happy days, you sorted." And I was like, this is great. But now
Yeah.
actually how you save, but you're not actually making any money that way there. And it's funny how many people in the tradition have grown up like that there, but now with people like yourself and with Simran and Francis Cook, have, and I just bringing out that actually there's cool ways of you saving money and making money if you know how it actually works. Which is quite crazy for me
Yeah.
because I love to ask a question. As I was thinking about this, there's yourself, there's Simran, there's Francis, and living here in New Zealand, you have Powerhouse Wahine that are doing this in the financial world. How does it make you feel as we look back and think about that?
Oh, amazing. I love it. Like, I think one of my main thoughts when I started the podcast was like, the more voices, the better, the more perspectives, the better, because my lived experience, my perspective on money, my money mindset, like that is going to be one perspective and not at all reflective of the majority's feelings about money. And the more people, I'm such an encourager of people starting podcasts or putting their story out there, because the more people who share, the more people will feel understood, because everyone can take little breadcrumbs or little bits of information from everyone's stories. So I think, looking back when I started the podcast at that time, I think it was just She's on the Money in terms of popular financial podcasts that I knew of, which is Australian based. And then after that, so many more kept popping up, which is incredible, because for the information to be made accessible, it can't be exclusive, and it needs
Yeah.
to be available to all sorts of people from a perspective that they understand. I mean, that's why I started the podcast, was because I couldn't find any resources that made sense to me. And there'll still be people out there who are looking for the right person to connect with. And that's why we need to have as many different perspectives as possible. So even like when it comes to the podcast space and people say, it's so saturated now, I always think if you have a passion for the conversations that you're wanting to have, and you believe in the power of yours and other voices to bring access to information, then that's really all you need. It's not even about being the best or the biggest. It's about putting out a perspective in the world and letting other people learn from that.
Yeah, and the key word there is learn, right? Learning our perspectives because everyone's perspective is so different. And I read a quote the other day that basically said every single person you meet in life is going to teach you something. And if you're open to that
Mm.
there, you know, you don't have to accept it, but you're going to learn something and you're going to learn about yourself and them. So I love how you spoke about perspective. You know, it doesn't matter if there's 20 people saying the same thing, but it's 20 different voices saying things in a different way, which 20 different people will react to or get attracted to. How did you choose
Yeah.
the name though? How did you choose the name The One Up Podcast?
I love that question because I honestly I don't get asked it very often, but the One Up project was basically a play on the words of trying to get the one up, and always trying to get the one up was used in the context of getting the one up on other people. So it was always about like, oh, I have the one up on them, or like you have the one up on this, that, the other. It was always about you against an external party. And I really wanted the One Up project to be all about getting the one up on yourself, on your previous self, and just getting better than the version of you from yesterday. So it was never about competing against other people, but always about competing against yourself and trying to become a better version. And that really sits at the heart of like everything I do and everything I talk about is how we just becoming better versions, learning more, absorbing more information, more perspective, so that we become so much more informed, empathetic, kind than the people we were yesterday. So yeah, it was really about just playing on that common saying and bringing it back to, I guess, like reflecting more on yourself than how you compare to other people.
I love that. I love that because that can be applicable in every part of life. I'm just picturing the One Up Journal popping up in a few stores in a few, in a few weeks' time, maybe. You know,
Yeah, I
rivaling
love that
Steve.
idea.
Yeah. Well, goodbye, Stephen Bartlett and your 1% diary. Here comes the One Up Journal.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
I'm gonna press pause the podcast, and the one thing you mentioned just before, which I didn't know about, was the fact that you were the first in your family to go to university. What is that like for you and for your whānau seeing this happening?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I think it's very interesting, when you grow up, because you realize how much your parents or your like guardian's perspective on life really does influence the decisions you make, especially early on. And you don't, like, I definitely didn't question too much about going to uni. I just knew, parents said this is a good idea. Okay, good idea, kind of thing. And I think they were obviously proud of me and everything like that. But to them, university was an avenue to success. If you had a degree, you had certainty and guarantees around the type of opportunities you could access. And I think nowadays it's becoming more and more relevant, and it really is up to the person as to how you use it. Although it has been interesting being here in London, because a lot of the jobs I've applied for have a requirement to have at least a bachelor's degree. And I think I look at that and I think, wow, I can't believe companies are still doing that, because it just feels so relevant for that to be the case now. But yeah, I mean, it definitely still impacts me to this day. So it's interesting because I think they were right in many ways, and that it still is a big proponent of proving to some extent, your capabilities or what you can do. But it is less relevant now. So yeah, I think they were very much influenced by the fact that they didn't go to university, and that if they had have had the chance, they would have. Because I'm pretty sure my dad was the generation where university was fully funded, or at least like majority funded, which that would have been amazing. And so he didn't take advantage of that. So his perspective was always like, man, if I had the chance to further my studies, and because he just went straight into, he's a concreter, so just went straight into the trades. Like if I had thought about it more, he would always say he would have gone and studied more. So I think he definitely felt like that was a suitable path for me, which is interesting now to reflect on how it has or hasn't impacted my life. But I think the main thing about uni as well is I'm just glad at this point I don't have to make that choice anymore, because I think about how much pressure it must be for young people now, when uni is such like a controversial or discussed topic about, is it right or should you go, and just the weight of having to make that choice. I mean, Tane, I'm sure you can relate to this in some ways. You're studying now and you had to make that decision. Like the weight of having to make that choice, I think, just becomes harder for people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it was an interesting space to navigate, but I think because my parents were really supportive of me just going, it made that decision pretty easy. And I think I reflect on it too, being first in my family, and I guess sometimes you don't realize how big it actually is to actually just go to university. Like I think because my perspective was I was around academic people because I was academic myself and I went, it didn't seem like a big step. But now when each time I go home or talk to my family about it, I still realize, just how much of a big step it actually is to move away from home to go to university. And I think that's where people can still take quite a lot away from university, even though it is obviously becoming more and more of a debated topic. I think, as you say, it depends on what the person's actually seeking to get out of that experience. Yeah.
100% agree. It definitely comes down to the individual, which is that's the difficult thing about it, I think, is that when you're younger, you don't 100% know who you are as an individual. And so you're just trying to make these choices about what you want for your future self when you've just gotten through your NCA exams and you're like, whew, glad that's done. And then you've got to make this a whole other choice. And I remember even having to decide when I was in uni what I was going to major in, and that being just this huge weight of this major is going to determine my career options for the rest of my life. And it's definitely a lot, I think, for people to feel like the choices they make, and all of our choices will influence us in some way, but it's a lot of pressure to know that a decision can impact or possibly impact the opportunities you have moving forward.
Yeah, and you're right there because I've been working in this space for a long time before my current role, and I remember when I started my role in 2011, talk about university was very easy. People either yes or no. It wasn't maybe, maybe. It was either yes, I'm going and I'm not going. Then as the years progressed, it didn't become yes, it became like, should I? Shouldn't I? And if I go, what am I going to do? And then it became, damn, there's so many choices. Like, first of all, you got to choose which university you want to go to. That's one of your choices. Because every university started teaching the same sort of thing now. Initially, it was like, okay, you go to XYZ because they teach XYZ. But now every university was teaching ABC as well. Oh, now what do I do? And then within ABC, instead of ABC, there's ABC, the EFG, HY. And you're like, oh, now what do I do? And as you said, Sarah, you're like, if I choose Z, but I should have chosen A, my life is all over. And, as you said, at school, you learn about school. And then overnight, you've got to decide what you want to study. And you're like, so it's becoming much, much harder. And, with also the advent of um, non-traditional learning models coming up as well, if we think about in the New Zealand context, you have Crimson and the Crimson Academy, what they do. You think about in the tertiary space with what Jordan Peterson is doing with his models of learning. You think about edX and TEDx and all these pretty cool things that you can access universities anywhere. Why would you go to university when you can sit at home? You think about LinkedIn Learning. So the choices are becoming. If I was 18 today, I'd be like, what do I do? So paralyzed, as you say, Sarah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, paralysis by choice is a real thing. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it definitely is.
And then after you navigated your university life and living in Auckland for a bit, what was that first adventure like when you got on a plane and like, hey, let's get out of here. Let's leave the land of the long white cloud.
Well, I've kind of been traveling somewhat for what feels like a long time now. So in 2022, I think, I was working at a really cool startup and having the best time, but they ended up going through some financial trouble before trying to raise capital, and then that led to a restructure, and I was caught up in that restructure. So I ended up leaving that company and traveling to Southeast Asia. And I decided I'm moving to Bali. I packed up my stuff. I sold my car. I did everything. And I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm moving. Having never had moved out of Auckland before or even traveled alone, that's very typical of my personality. I tend to be quite an all or nothing person. I'm deciding something and we're going all out. And so I left, and that was a hugely transformative experience for me because I was away from New Zealand for about 5.5 months, and I was incredibly lonely and isolated almost the entire time. And so that was a struggle because it was so unnatural for my personality to feel that way. And it was a real shock to the system. And I think it also felt like a personal failure because I had decided I was going to do something and then I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to. And I realized, oh, I don't actually think I want to live here or move here. And I think maybe I want to go back to New Zealand. And, there's so many emotions in that. And then I ended up coming home, moved down to the Mount, and then after that made the decision to go traveling again, which was the last year of my life. And I was a little bit more set up then, a little bit more prepared. So the second time round, I had more information behind me, I suppose. I was able to prepare a lot better, and I'd learned some lessons, one of them being to not put so much pressure on what an experience should be and just experience it for what it is. And doing that meant I had a much happier, smoother travel experience over the last year, which meant I was able to stay away for long enough that I could find a base somewhere else if that was what I wanted to do, which I did, and ended up moving to London. So I was put in a position where I had more options because I'd learned from that first experience. So yeah, leaving the country, I suppose, came from this desire to explore more. Like I'm very, very curious, and I try to be very intentionally curious as well. Like I put myself outside of my comfort zone quite often because I like seeing how I handle the pressure and handle the challenge, and I enjoy things that are different and contrasting to my own experience, and I really enjoy learning. So I think that's where the desire to travel came from. But also I have a really huge passion for solving problems, and I want all of my work to contribute to creating meaningful solutions to the world's toughest problems. And I felt like I would be able to gain a really interesting, unique perspective by leaving my own environment and figuring out how people are able to solve those problems in much bigger cities and much bigger environments, and to eventually, bring those learnings back home and help solve problems back home as well. So that's, I suppose, what led me to this point. And it took a couple of goes of, getting up and moving my life to actually feel like I'm at a point now where I can feel settled and happy with that decision. Because if there's one thing I've gained since moving overseas, it's that I have the ultimate respect for anyone that moves countries or moves out of their comfortable environment into an entirely new one, and especially the utmost respect and I suppose empathy for people that move overseas and don't have a strong passport. Because after having experienced trying to get a visa in Egypt and hearing experiences of people there trying to move overseas, I just think, I'm so grateful that my experience was challenging but not impossible, and that I have the opportunity to explore different parts of the world if I so choose to do so. And that's been a huge privilege and a luxury, and given me so much perspective as I try to fulfill my purpose, which I feel is to solve tough problems.
No, I love that. The tough problems will come in a second there. I really have to acknowledge that the whole passport acknowledgement, because I grew up in Zimbabwe. Whenever I tell people about traveling, they were like, "Oh, it must be easy." I was like, "No." The minute you produce a Zimbabwean passport, everyone is like, "Ah, yeah." And I when I finished my master's at Otago, I was like, I want to travel around the world for a year or so. And I still remember going to the travel agent, because that's travel agent at the time there, and I had to do it because I had a Zimbabwean passport. And she just looked at me and she was like, "Mate, you're not traveling anywhere because your passport is going to require so many visas in every single place." Um, and I could have so easily
Mm.
said, "No, I'm going to stop, not do that there." But I did it. It was a challenge. But the day I could get my New Zealand passport, I just grabbed it quickly because I just knew the options that opens up for me. And I'm really glad
Mm.
that you acknowledge that there, because sometimes, I mean, I forget about that. That having a New Zealand passport means I can just jump on a plane tomorrow and go to basically most places in the world, which other people cannot do. Which is, my parents still
Mm.
live in Zimbabwe. My parents live in Zimbabwe. If they wanted to visit me, they can't jump on a plane and go, we come to visit you. We've got to go through visas and so yeah, it's crazy how people's norms are so different, but we forget about that sometimes. So yeah.
Oh, it's massive.
Yeah, it's crazy, but also what it does, as you said, when you travel, you realize this here. When you stay in your comfort zone, you don't realize that. And it's not your fault. You just don't realize what's outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like I do think there's so many incredible things that come from travel if you have the opportunity to do so. And I think the more the more I travel, the more grateful I become. And I think it only fuels my fire to take advantage of life that much more because, I've been given these opportunities for whatever reason to be able to travel or to move to a new country if I want to. And so that, yeah, I think it's an important thing to take advantage of and use that for good in whatever way you can, whether that's just showing up as a kind person every day or whether that's contributing to a business that's doing X, whatever way is your way of doing that. I definitely think it's important.
Yeah, and I love how you define showing up to be good. Good can be, like you said, being kind, a good kind person, or solving a problem, whatever the problem is
Mm.
like. You mentioned something that really intrigued me. Your field, your purpose is to solve those problems, those challenging problems. Has that always been a Sarah thing, or has that developed over time as you have started seeing the world and maybe having conversations in your podcast that have just fueled the fire that you got, hey, the world needs me in a different way.
Yeah, I think the seed was always there, but I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't have the language for it. Like, I've only now just been able to describe what I see my purpose as in those words, and I've only really used those words over the last maybe 6 months to a year. And I honestly think the grueling job hunt has been a huge contributor to that because I've had to understand what's my value, what are my strengths, what are my skills, what do I care about, why would I apply to this company? Like having to understand and answer all of those questions all of the time makes you reflect a lot on what you actually care about. And I've always been a career focused person. Like I want work to be a part of my life in a way that contributes more than just a paycheck. I know not everyone's like that, but that's just been my personal, I guess, like feeling towards work. And so that has always been a part of it is how am I contributing through the work that I do. And then further to that, work isn't just the job you go to every day, but it's the person you show up as in the world. So in the way that I am and the person that I grow to be, I also want to be someone who can solve tough problems, who can contribute positive, good things to the world. And to me, that starts with showing up as a curious and an empathetic person in every conversation, being an active listener. And the podcast has 100% taught me to do that. Like I think before I started the podcast, I had a much lower level of empathy in so many ways, a much lower ability to be an active listener. And I had a much more rigid view of what was right and wrong in the world. And it was, I had my values and they were very strong and I believed them with conviction, but I was never able to shift those for whatever reason. And I think as I started the podcast and I learned more about different perspectives, you understand that your lived experience and your perspective is not the only one in the world, and that actually right and wrong is pretty much down to context every single time and is not definitive in any way and is not reflective of any, like it's not one thing. And travel has also helped that in so many ways. Like if I spent a lot of time in Cairo and Egypt, and the definition of what's right and wrong, what the good thing for a woman to be doing is completely different to what would be happening in New Zealand. And so if you think about it in that context, well, really right and wrong just comes down to where you live and who you surround yourself with. So the podcast has absolutely taught me that about how I want to show up in order to solve those tough problems. And I think just try and break down the limits of your own perspective, because I still have values and strong morals and things like that now. But I think the quote is like strong values loosely held or something. Like I'm happy for them to shift and change, and I'm more than happy to be wrong on any occasion. And I try to lose this desire to be right, and kind of like drop that ego, because I think that's when you'll actually find the opportunities to solve problems, is through your ability to just be curious around your thinking and a lot more empathetic.
And that's so true, this Sarah, and I'm glad you hearted that because a lot of I mean, I'm guilty of this as well. I'm sure Tana is guilty as well. Speaking for you, Tana here, but we all growing up, we all think our way is the way. Our lived experience is the only lived experience, and if you think about all conflict that happens, it happens because people are so rigid about their world. And I remember someone saying to me when I was doing my coach training that everyone's perception is their reality. And that hit me really hard because that is true. Your perception is your reality no matter what. But when you can shift and think about, Sarah's perception is her reality, how do I understand that perception? Then your world changes quite dramatically and you learn about, actually, maybe I am wrong. Maybe this is not the way it should be. But it's hard to do that. It takes time. If I tell you to do it, it's not going to happen, but it takes time.
It 100% does. It takes time, and it takes intentional effort too. Like it's not really easy to show up as a kind and empathetic person. Like you have to actually put in the effort to do that, and to want to understand someone even if you don't straight away, and to stop and to understand that you could be wrong. Like that does take a reflective, introspective person who's okay with not being right. So yeah, it's an active effort I've made, because if I had described the person I was previous to the podcast, one thing that was quite central to my personality was that I became quite emotionally involved in everything, like even things that didn't actually concern me at all, like other people's problems. God, there's a whole situation happening outside. You can probably hear that.
Yeah.
What is going on down there? Sorry. I don't
I'm
know if
sorry.
I should
Yeah.
wait for them. Okay. God, sorry about that. It was like just kept going. I didn't know when it was going to end. Yeah, I would become very emotionally involved in situations that didn't even involve me, and I would get very upset. And although that's great because you have empathy and you have sensitivity towards things, and I felt very, very passionately about things, which is a trait I try not to lose, because I do want to feel passionately about things. But you can still have empathy without getting emotionally overwhelmed. You can still have empathy for someone without absorbing like what they're going through. And actually, I think a lot of people mistake what true empathy is, in feeling like it is crying alongside someone, or like feeling their emotions in the exact same way they're feeling them. And it's not really about that. Like true empathy really is about being able to see something or have a perspective from someone else's point of view, be in their perspective without like taking on the emotional weight that comes with that, and being there to support that person through that thing, and still being that pillar for them. So I think just learning bits and pieces like that have helped evolve how I can show up for other people in a much more impactful and effective way, which hopefully contributes to that like wider goal and purpose I feel like I want to fulfill.
Yeah, and it's interesting is that because we have this definition of empathy that's in every textbook and in every when you're learning, but as you said before, empathy doesn't look like that at all. It's
Mm.
it's very different. But it also comes with conversation with other people. Living in Auckland now, it's really interesting for me. Li Going to the North Shore versus West Auckland versus South Auckland, and the different communities. Are living in the same space that they have a very different worldview. And it's very easy, when I'm in the workspace, sometimes some of my colleagues are like, oh, it's insert insert word for certain suburb. I'm like, yeah, but have you ever been there? Have you actually been there? Or is this it's second hand or third hand? Oh, I've never gone there because blah. It's like, yeah, but how many times do we do that in our lives where we don't do something and we just base it on what someone else has told us? And I just think, when you have podcast conversations or when you meet people on the train and randomly they speak, they're all just humans. Um, my my core belief is nobody wakes up every day wanting to be harmful. You don't wake up and every day to go, I want to be harmful, but you do wake up living in a world that is intensely positive for you, whatever that means. And if that means that you have to commit a crime, you're committing a crime because there's something that you need to do in your world that requires that. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's what people have to do. And if we shift our thinking and go, actually, not everyone's the same level playing field. It just got you to think a little bit differently. But again, it's hard. It's not like, this is so easy to do. It's easy to talk about it, but in that situation, you might go, no, 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 that's a bad person because we're just so programmed that they're all a good person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's really interesting you say that actually. Have you read a book called The Prosperity Paradox
I have.
by or have you have read it?
I have read it, yes.
Ah, okay. So I guess for those listening who don't know, Tane, have you read that book before? It's it's a really incredible book essentially about how well, the subtext to it is how market creating innovations can lift nations out of poverty. So, how a certain business structure or a way of coming into a community and lifting them up can kind of take them structurally out of poverty and into prosperity. And something you mentioned, Pradesh, just then around people commit a crime for a reason. The book goes over that a lot and around the word is slipping my mind, but essentially just around areas that have a high level of crime. That what the reason that a lot of people are doing that are because they're trying to solve a problem in their own life, right? Like they're doing that for a certain reason, and it's not to do with just coming out and trying to create harm. And so the goal isn't to reduce the harm. The goal is to reduce the problem that the people are having leading them to causing the harm, if that makes sense. But it just reminded me of that book, and it's one of my favorites. And if people are very interested in how to solve problems from a grassroots level, then I would definitely recommend reading that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. It also reminds me of in my NLP training as well. It's everybody lives their life with positive intent. Everybody lives their life with positive intent, but it might not be the same intent that you have. It doesn't mean it's wrong. But it's hard for us to
Mm,
see that there. And then when you read books like The Prosperity Paradox, or you do trainings, you talk to people, then your world just starts shifting slowly but surely. And if
yeah,
it's not, then if it's not, that means you're
completely.
married to your idea. I don't want to shift, which is quite hard.
Mm,
I'm going to shift back to your podcast a little bit because I mean, there's so much to talk about, Sarah. You're a very fascinating human being here. Um, in terms of the podcast, when your reach started going as great as it did, how did that make you? What is your reaction like? Because as you said before, that wasn't the goal. Your goal was just to have these conversations, and as the numbers started creeping up and things started changing for you, what, as you said before, at the start, you like it changed your life quite dramatically. Not just the numbers, but the conversations. How did you feel when people started going, "Hey, Sarah, this is pretty cool"?
yeah, that was cool. That really felt like I was doing something good, which is fulfilling. Most of the growth around the podcast happened in the first 2 years, so I think that was also impacted the experience of having a podcast because often, the linear way of something progressing is that you start off small and then it kind of builds over time very slowly. The unlikely thing to happen is that you have like huge spikes of growth and that kind of thing. And that was the case when I first started. It was in the first couple of years, especially. I just was very lucky with the timing, honestly. Like coming into COVID, I had no idea. COVID wasn't even a part of my mind when I launched the podcast. It just so happened that people had all this time. People were constantly out on walks and things like that. So people had more time to listen to podcasts, and people became so much more interested in financial literacy because there was so much uncertainty with COVID and what was going to happen with people's jobs. And it was just a very, very convenient combination of things that meant the podcast grew very quickly. And to hear comments, like my favorite comments were things like, listening to your podcast made me reflect on how I behave about X. And so now I've changed this, or I've gotten rid of my buy now, pay laters, or I've gotten out of debt, or I'm starting to invest, or things like that. Like seeing actual actions happen from the work that you're putting in, that is a really incredible feeling. And, for me, I've never really like the content side of things, like creating Instagram posts or posting on stories or whatever, that isn't the thing that excites me or ignites me. I love being in my DMs. Like I love having conversations with people. I love when I post an episode and someone comes back and it's like, oh, Sarah, it's really interesting you said that. I had this thought about what you were saying. That's my favorite thing, that we can continue the conversation beyond the podcast. It doesn't just end the moment the mic goes down. That is my favorite thing. So seeing that happen was a really, really cool experience. And I think it was also just good proof that if you care enough about something, and if you feel passionate about something and you have a really strong why, to just keep moving through with it, no matter what it might look like to other people or how you're perceived. Because, when I said I was starting a podcast about financial literacy, I think like a few people were sort of like, this is a bit random and kind of interesting, especially because at the time podcasts weren't that popular. And so it wasn't like a cool thing or whatever to start a podcast. But I believed so strongly in what I was talking about and the conversations I was having. And I found a huge community through that. Like there was a piece of my life that was missing without the podcast, without those conversations, without the access to those people. And that's another incredible reason to start a podcast, is that if you feel like you're just not connecting in the way you want to with the people around you, or you might love the people around you, but you're just not having certain conversations that you would like to be having. That's what's so great about starting your own community or trying something new, is that you find these people who you align with on such different levels that you never could have expected. And that was one of the greatest things that came out of the podcast, was just connection with people. And I still have so many friends to this day who I catch up with that I met purely through having the podcast or purely through Instagram. I've caught up with so many people here in London that have followed the podcast, that have moved here, and we've gone for a wine or a coffee or whatever. And I love that. Like that is my favorite thing, actually bringing those connections into real life, furthering that conversation, as I said, after the podcast. So yeah, as I saw it grow, it was definitely a fulfilling feeling. But then also on the other hand of that, on the other side, when it comes to social media, you have to be really careful that you don't start to rely on validation from those sorts of things, like likes or whatever. And that is a very real problem. And like something I've struggled with myself is not getting my own validation from how many people listen to the podcast or how many likes I get on this, that, the other thing. Because you are still valuable without someone else telling you you are. But when you're used to like having some form of growth, that can be hard to believe. So I definitely think it's important to be very intentional and conscious when you are doing anything on social media as well.
That's such a beautiful share there, Sarah. And what I got away from there was the word connection. I think connection is key with anything that we do, with intentional connection, and how that plays. We have the conversation, but what happens when the conversation ends? That connection carries on. It's not a conversation for the sake of a conversation. There's a lot more which happens, which is really beautiful. But also something that you shared there was I know struggle with this, trying to get the validation for this. This we've been doing this podcast for a while, and when I jumped on the call with you a few months ago, I was like, we're really struggling how do we grow this? And I remember you said to me, was like, it doesn't actually matter about the growth, if one person is listening to you, that's all that really matters. And it was really hard for us to think about, but it doesn't stop us from producing the content because we love what we do. It's not about the numbers, it's about this. And we know even if one person jumps on it and listens to this, they'll take away something to put into their life. So thank you for that reminder there. But we're all human, and we unfortunately the algorithms train us to look for those numbers and those trends. So yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that you had the same struggle as well. Tana, any
Cool.
questions from you?
No, I've been trying a question, but I've been too entrenched in the conversation to actually think of the following question.
No, that's all good. That's all good. Sarah, now as you this is a question I was pondering with you. You have this identity with the podcast, but that's not who you are. That's one part of you. And now as you go into the job market and you're trying to solve those problems in the world, how does Sarah navigate that life with all these labels that have been attached to you from different parts of the things that you've achieved? I mean, is that something you struggle with, or you don't actually think about that?
It's such a relevant question. And I had a conversation with someone about this the other day, who I was catching up with for the first time, another Kiwi here in London. And he was saying he was really struggling because he had such a strong professional identity back in New Zealand, and now moving to this new place, no one knows you, and you're trying to like establish again this identity, and sort of you're having to work so much harder to prove that you have value. And so I've definitely struggled with the same thing. It's like in New Zealand, I've had this podcast. People have seen it grow and change and shift, and me grow and change and shift over the last 5 years now that I've had it. And so that does create a professional and a personal identity of not only who you are, but what you can do and what you're capable of. And so you feel like you have to justify less like your worth as a person. However, moving here to a new city, you're completely anonymous and without any existing connections. I've had to build up professional connections. I've had to build up that network again. So work on going out, meeting people, networking, which is extremely vulnerable and hard to do in so many ways. But yeah, just putting myself out there. So identity has been a huge question mark for me this year, especially in the last month, just thinking about what do I want to do and who do I want to be? And, you know, even thinking about the podcast, is that something that I want to continue in the same way, or does it need to change? And how I think you have these moments in life where you pivot and you change seasons. And I definitely think right now is one of those for me where I'm going to make a big shift. Like when I was finishing uni, and well, actually probably not then, but when I was the first year I was in my corporate accounting role, I decided to leave 9 or 10 months into the role. And that was like one of those moments where it was like, okay, I've branded myself as being this corporate accounting person who's got a whole career ahead of them laid out for them if I want to climb the corporate ladder. But now I've decided, no, I don't want that. And I've got a podcast now, and actually I want to be in marketing. So that was like a huge shift and transition for my life. And then moving overseas for the first time, or wanting to like move to overseas and going to Southeast Asia, that was like a whole other shift as well of who am I now, what's my identity, and leaving kind of the marketing role I was in and not working and trying to find remote work. And so now I think I'm at one of those pivotal stages again where I need to work out who am I essentially, which I also always think is a good thing to reflect on. And it doesn't need to be hugely existential. It just needs to be you inching a little bit closer towards something that you think you might be interested in. And so, yeah, I'm kind of rebuilding what identity looks like to me, especially outside of home, outside of New Zealand. And it's a scary and an exciting thing because you're able to completely rebuild and rebrand yourself if that's what you want to do. Every time I meet a new person here, they're meeting me for the first time, and I could either go down the path of saying I've got this podcast and this is who I am, or I could go down the path of saying I've been a traveler for the last year and that's who I am. And like, you get to choose what levers you pull on, and I'm working out, I suppose, what that looks like for me at the moment, which is, yeah, it's cool.
And if you think about, what we said at the start about being creative, this is a great chance for you to choose your creative, which pathway do you want to be in? How does that actually look like? Because as you said before, to others, you're a blank canvas, and you are a blank canvas, and you can have your own painting. And who is the Sarah that's turning up? I always like asking the question about who is XYZ on this particular day, because on this day you are this person, but tomorrow you are going to be a different person, whatever label or whatever you want to call yourself. So it's really exciting, but also scary,
Yes,
in
yeah,
both ways. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. We have to acknowledge that there. Um, Talking about your podcast one last time, how did you manage to get Stephen Bartlett's marketing person on your? How did that feel? Because obviously Stephen Bartlett is crazy huge, and you managed to get her on your podcast. What is that like? How's that like for you?
Oh, it was great. Do you know, so many of the guests I've had on, it's just cold outreach. Like I just reach out to them on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's so good for that. Like people still underestimate the power of LinkedIn, but the people you can connect with, especially if you're kind of always just tinkering away on it, like you see someone who's interesting, oh, I'll just connect with them because you never know in the future what that might turn into. And yeah, that's how I've done a lot of my like finding my guests is just through LinkedIn. So with with Natasha, yeah, I reached out to her on LinkedIn, and I tried to kind of evolve my strategy in terms of how I reach out to people by being very value first. And I think that's become a lot more important. Like, what can I offer you? Because so often people get messages and it's like, hi, I'd really like this from you. I'd really like your time, or I'd really like whatever it is. But if you can find a way that gives them value first, then you're pretty much guaranteed to be in every single time. And so with the podcast, my sort of like leverage was, you have access to an audience, but also I know you're someone that wants to build your personal brand. So let's get in the studio, let's get it professionally recorded, let's get some clips done. So you have some really like high quality assets that you can take away and use for your social media. No need to like reference me or anything. This is purely about you and what I can give to you. And that's sort of how I try to provide value to the guests that would encourage them to come on. And I think over here that probably works a little bit more because people are so much more focused on personal brand, depending on who you are. Whereas in New Zealand, like personal brand isn't as huge of a thing yet. And like a majority of people aren't concerned with having like clips of themselves for social media. But, as things change, I feel like that will probably grow a little bit more. So yeah, just honestly, cold outreach. I would recommend doing that every single time. I know it works for a lot of people. And if you have like a very authentic winning formula for how you can reach out to people, then yeah, you'll probably be successful. And another reason, I'm just like starting a podcast big as advocate, but that's another reason to start a podcast, is that it's a really effective networking tool, and a great way to get in deep with someone straight away. Because I mean, even the three of us, like we've had this conversation now, you guys know me a lot better. I hopefully know you guys a little bit better as well. And then yeah, if there's opportunity to do things in future, it feels so much more natural and authentic because we now have that connection. And I think that's really useful, especially for young people in their careers, if they're wanting to grow their career or have access to any kind of space.
And that was a trick question because for people who don't know, who haven't heard this before, because I keep on harping about this, LinkedIn is the way to go. And the only reason I got connected with Sarah is because I went into LinkedIn DMs all those months ago, and I was like, "Hey, Sarah,"
Yeah.
so I'm glad you said that because it works, but the way it works is when you're genuine about it all. So but it's really cool to
Yeah.
hear that someone who's also doing the podcasting for a while has got the same sort of strategy. So, and again, I'm a huge advocate for LinkedIn. And Tanya knows this. Everyone I talk to, I just link a thing, and they're like, "We don't need it in New Zealand." I was like, "You do need it, buddy. You do need it." So I'm glad you said that there. Sarah, I know you've got to head away soon, so I don't want to rush you. I guess our last
Mm.
question before we close up is our podcast is called Baskets of Knowledge, and we invite all our guests to share a piece of knowledge to put into our kete in our basket before we say goodbye. And you've shared so much today, but is there any piece of knowledge that you think myself, Tane, or listeners would go, "This is actually pretty awesome"?
Yeah, so there's two things that I like to pick up patterns, and there are two things that my podcast guests have said over the last 5 years of interviewing them. The two things that always come through are one, to take risks, and two, to be curious. And I find that of successful people I speak to, people that are happy and fulfilled in what they do and have grown something or scaled something massively, they typically will always in some way work in those two things into how they got to where they are. So take risks, with anything you do, go out of your comfort zone, try new things, take the plunge into something, even if you're not 100% sure. Yeah. And be curious is to always be open to new ways of thinking, always ask why, don't judge. Be curious before you judge anything. And yeah, be open to being wrong. So if you can do those two things, I think it's a really good combination to find out who you are, what you want, and just to keep living life in a way that's authentic to you.
Amazing. I love that. Take risks and be curious. If you do one of those two things, then your life is going to change quite dramatically. What a
Yeah.
beautiful share. What a beautiful share. Sarah, it's been really fantastic having you on today. I've learned so much more about you. Again, the power that you have with your words, but the power that you have with what you're doing is really impactful and really very apparent. Tana, any last words from you?
No, I guess just reiterate what you said. Just really powerful messages in the podcast, and I'm sure they'll come through to our listeners. So yeah, just thanks for giving us your time.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, guys. Like, it means a lot. And yeah, I feel honored to be a part of these ongoing conversations because you guys get some really cool guests. So it's cool to be here.
No worries. Thank you so much. And yeah, until next time, just for our listeners out there, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you didn't, go back and listen again because you probably fell asleep. Go and have a listen again. But until next time, don't forget to stay awesome. Don't forget to find a reason to smile. And the most important thing of all is don't forget to put something into your past knowledge. Till next time, thanks, Sarah. Bye, everybody. Peace.